2014. I'm at the birthday of a dear friend. Around me, people are chatting and laughing. And in one hand, I hold a delicious piece of cake, still untouched. And in the other hand, a sheet of paper with some bar charts. My friend just turned 40. She's married to a wonderful husband and has 2 really beautiful daughters. And she has breast cancer. She stands for the difficult choice, chemo or no chemo, a choice that she doesn't take lightly. She has read everything she could find, but still her doubts haven't eased. And now this sheet of paper with some scientific evidence provided by her doctor to make the choice easier. And her question to me, as a mathematician, what do you think about this? Numerical information or data, they are often seen as representatives of the objective truth, of scientific evidence, and everything about these graphs emanates the same. The data of a large database of breast cancer patients is summarized in a few bar charts, making it easier to compare the group that chose chemo with the group that didn't. And in this first group, the percentage of women alive after 10 years is a little bit higher. So you would be crazy not to opt for those few percent. And I forget the people around me. And I become really angry. Because how is it possible that this kind of information is given to patients to make such an important decision about life? Because mathematically, these graphs say far less than they suggest. And moreover, they don't tell the whole story. They raise more questions than they answer. How big are the reported groups? Because if they're not equivalent in size, you cannot simply compare them. You have to correct for this size. And to what extent is this still representative for the current treatment? After all, it concerns women that got their chemotherapy maybe 15, 20, 25 years ago. And why do you only see a bar with the gains of chemo and nowhere the negative effects? Overtreatment is a known phenomenon, and in this case, certainly not without consequences. My anger subsides a bit, but it makes room for a much uneasier feeling, worry. I assume that every doctor wants the best for her patients, so this is not malice. Apparently, despite all good intentions, something else goes wrong here, and that something else is invisible, almost. Putting this in a more general perspective, now that computers get more and more sophisticated, our society becomes increasingly data-driven. Decisions, whether it's our own or those that concern us, are based on data analysis, and we got used to the fact that data is always available to back up our choices. And that gives us a really safe feeling. Because in today's society, plain bad luck and coincidence are hard to handle. We really want to believe in the objectivity of numbers. And all this is about my big passion, mathematics. I always wanted to become something with mathematics. I chose to study applied maths in Delft because I loved the idea that you can use mathematics to solve a wide variety of problems. And I wasn't disappointed. It is true, the applications of mathematics are endless. I think you all know the formulas in physics, or the application of the power of calculations or statistics in other disciplines. But for me, there's so much more. For me, mathematics is a way of looking at the world, of trying to understand her and to make her more beautiful. In Delft, I learned to question everything, literally every decision and every choice and every assumption. And that enables me, when I translate a problem into mathematics, to come with new perspectives and to isolate the core issues. Without mathematics, we wouldn't have been able to travel to the moon, we wouldn't have smartphones, and Pixar characters certainly wouldn't have moved so elegantly. I started my working life as a cryptographer, but after a few years I switched to educational research. And with respect to the use of mathematics, this was a real culture shock to me. Because I noticed that quantitative research had a much higher status than qualitative research, and that evidence based on data was viewed far more valuable than insights obtained from in-depth and careful analysis of a few cases. And this is in big contrast with the critical attitude of mathematicians towards such numbers. Because I learned to be very modest about what you can and cannot claim based on quantitative methods. And I learned to be very careful about statistics because they're so often counterintuitive. And I miss this awareness in education, both in the research as in the way we are testing our children in our schools. Like in so many other disciplines, there seemed to be a blind faith in numbers representing the objective truth. And my own health could also serve as an example. For more than 18 years, my thyroid hormone levels primarily determined the dosage of my medicine. According to protocol, I was not a lot more than my blood values. And now, in retrospect, I know that my personal feeling about my health was far more accurate about my optimal values, because I now know that those deviate a lot from the average. I am not average. And the list of examples could be endless, covering almost every aspect of life, like in pharmacy, where only a selection of research is published, or in politics, where fake news and statistics are used to dress up opinions as facts, or in the accessibility of information, where our online behavior is used to create filter bubbles. We are willingly and sometimes unknowingly misled by our initial feeling about the value of numbers. All good and well. What should we do with this insight? Well, we could just check every background of every number that we encounter. But I don't know about you, but for me that would take far too much time. Well, the other side, we could just distrust every piece of information and discard it. I think that would also be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So both are not really attractive alternatives. But most importantly, they don't address the real issue, because the real issue is how we consider numbers to be truth, without considering the context in which they were created. The true value is our interpretation, and I think that we all have a responsibility here. I think the world needs more critical mathematical thinking. And how does that work? Well, critical mathematical thinking is critical thinking, but then using some basic understanding of mathematics and its applications. Before you start to calculate anything, you have to make choices, and those choices influence the outcomes. And these choices are often hidden inside the software or in lengthy reports. Or they're not visible because they were made unconsciously, because they originate in our background, in our belief systems, reflecting our personal goals, our prejudgments, our hopes, and the paradigms we believe in. With critical mathematical thinking, you try to uncover those choices, and by uncovering, you can truly value the numbers, or argue about them, but then at the source by arguing the choices that were made. And this critical mathematical thinking is not difficult. Everyone can do this. With a bit of common sense, you can come very far. You just have to start. And if you want to start tomorrow, I hope, then these two principles a really good starting point. And the first principle is what I call definition of success. The formulas or the algorithms are literally defining what we call success in a certain context. Like your sat-nav that has a different formula if you want to know the fastest route or the shortest route. And there are two situations in which you can be extra critical. The first one is when studies claim their results in rather broad terms, like most efficient or most effective. What does effective mean? What is the definition of success? It's really worthwhile to check, and I think you might be surprised. And the second situation is when the definition of success becomes a goal instead of a means. Like in Dieselgate, where the test results became so important for business that they drove decisions and even re-engineering. The second principle is what I call pain of the error. A lot of applications of mathematics have to do with predictions, and what not a lot of people realize is that you can influence the precision of those predictions at a price, and the willingness to pay this price depends on which side you are. Like a company that wants to base credit applications on postal codes. They are mainly interested in not giving a loan to a defaulter. But for the customer, it's the other way around, because it's quite painful if you're credit-worthy and you can't get a loan just because you happen to live in the wrong street. And if you look at society, if this is done on a wider scale, this might even add to segregation. And the second one is to be critical about the data that is used. We might think that algorithms, computers, are unbiased, that they are more objective in how they perform than the human mind. But we forget that the data that they use contains traces of the past, including prejudices like gender and race issues. And if you're not careful, these prejudices creep into the equations. Back to my friend. She chose chemo, based on a lot more arguments than only the statistics, and knowing that you can't get any guarantees. And she now uses this experience as a spokeswoman for the position of patients. Mathematics is a really powerful tool, a knife that should be handled with great care. We need to be more critical of how and when to use her, knowing her power, but also her limitations. And we need to be more aware that behind every number there are people making choices. They are not objective. And with critical mathematical thinking, you can uncover those choices and in that sense, relieve a bit of my worry. The world is complex. We as people are not one-dimensional and don't fit in one box. Plain bad luck and coincidence do exist, and therefore we cannot fully capture the world into numbers. Thankfully, I think, because this complexity and this unpredictability is what is making life so beautiful.